Our speaker this morning, still doesn't seem like this is working, but
It's
our
going.
speaker this morning is Dianne Sanborn. She's been married for 40 years. She has three daughters and two grandchildren. She's a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and she enjoys genealogy, research, and reading. She's in the book club. Dianne has served in women's ministry for over 40 years, and she's been teaching for over 35 years. She loves to be a student and a teacher of the Word, and she also has a wonderful family right here who supports her. Find the way. Scoot over just a little bit. Her husband Bruce runs a family business. He loves to mentor young people. So for 15 years, he's actually been coaching boys and girls tennis and girls softball at local high school. And last year, he was Orange County Coach of the Year in boys tennis, and has been for the girls softball before. So that's a wonderful support for her. Her second daughter, Tracy, and her husband, Jared, have two children. Over here. Her oldest daughter, Brianne, go with the oldest daughter here. Brianne and her husband, Josh, are entertainers. This is kind of fun. They're involved in everything from producing their own TV shows to performing, and also have done shows at Disneyland and Universal Studios. Her second daughter, Tracy, and her husband, Jared, they have two children, and of course, Diane's grandchildren, Skylar and Dustin, and they live locally, and they go here to the shoreline. Jared works at Costco, and Tracy's a teacher, but because she's got little ones, she works for Dianne and her husband, Bruce. Diane's youngest daughter is Erin, and she's almost 34, but functions at a 2 to 3 year old level. Dianne says that she is God's perfect gift to a woman in need of patience and a greater capacity for love. I just love Diane's attitude. When doing this lesson, I could just hear her sweet spirit coming through the lesson. That's why I just love to be able to, especially when you know some of these gals and you're doing the lesson, it's like I just felt Diane's sweet spirit coming through. So I want to welcome Dianne Sanborn as our teacher this morning. Come on up, Dianne.
Good morning, ladies. I hope as you came in, you got a ticket. If not, we'll get you one later. It's not for anything right away. But on it, you will see the title of the teaching today, which is Destinations, A Journey of the Heart. And I think we have it back here as well. When we look at Saul's story of his beginnings, we see a man with one destination in mind: the Gentiles, wherever they might be. He was ready from day one to fulfill the call on his life, but God had other plans for him. God had other destinations for Saul before he would send him out to the Gentiles. These destinations would not only prepare him for his destination of the Gentiles, but they had everything to do with the preparation for his final destination, heaven. You see, God's goal for Saul and for us is Christ-likeness. And on this journey toward heaven, we have destinations that we will encounter: trials, tribulations, and oh yes, blessings. And those will conform, or might I say, prepare our hearts for that final destination. This first leg of Saul's journey that we have looked at this past week, is very important because it sets the tone for the rest of his journey. Now, God has plans for our lives as well. Along our journey, there are destinations such as those that Saul had. We have our Arabias, our Jerusalems, and our Tarsus. I don't know how to say that if I plural it. Anyway, we go to Tarsus too every once in a while. Sometimes we arrive at those destinations because of God's planning, Sometimes it's just because we live in a fallen world and that's life. And there are times we get there because of our own foolishness and sin. But no matter how we get there to those destinations, God will use them to do a work in our heart. And thus, the title, now we've left the title. Destinations, A Journey of the Heart. Anyway, I would like to open in prayer. I always need it, a little extra. I know Debbie prayed, but I'd like to open in prayer here. Father God, I just come before you, Lord, and I thank you for this day. I thank you for these women that are sitting here, and some of them are desperate to hear from you. They are just desperate to hear your voice, Lord. And others just want to hear you. They're not quite desperate, but they do want to hear you, and that's why they've come. And Lord, this vessel standing up here is weak and inadequate. But Lord, I pray that if it's just in the connection between my voice and their ears that you do the work, may your words be the ones that they hear. May it be your heart that they feel and sense in their hearts and their spirits. So, Lord, be with us this morning, that your word would be mighty in this room. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Up. More often than not, these destinations that I spoke of, and let me name a few, of chronic health issues, job loss, relationship issues, infertility, financial troubles, you fill in the blank. These destinations are not often on our travel plans. Sometimes we are not even expecting them. Just recently, I was reading a book. I do BookBub, and this book is really good. I'll share with you the author later on if you want to know. But she was writing of such a destination in her life. That was the diagnosis of cancer for her daughter. And she spoke of her arrival at this destination as a sharp turn that showed up without her permission. She didn't actually use the word destination. That's my word. She used the word real life. And before we get started on Saul's story, I would like to share with you my real life story. Like Saul's story from this week's lesson, my story covers a number of years, a little over 8 years. And like Saul's story, like Saul, I had my sights set on my next destination, retirement. I could see it. A nice house in a quiet neighborhood, and a church and shopping nearby. I was going to walk there. I don't walk. But I was going to walk there in this destination that I had ahead of me. But life took a sharp turn without my permission, and real life happened. Let me read to you an article to get us started on that story. This upscale multiplex opened on September 27, 2008, on the 4th floor of the Anaheim's Garden Walk shopping complex. It had 14 screens and an IMAX auditorium, as well as a cocktail lounge and VIP screening rooms. Cinema Fusion is a division of Sanborn Theaters. That was our theater. Opened up in what year? 2008. Does anybody know 2008? Yes. The housing market crisis. And even before this opening, we were in trouble. The main contractor filed for bankruptcy, and the subs were left unpaid, and we did not have the money to pay those subs. This situation would lead to numerous lawsuits, numerous lawyers, and trouble. Most of the surrounding businesses, or those that were going to be in the Garden Walk, had backed out because of the crisis. And so the 4th floor of the Garden Walk was pretty much a ghost town. And on top of that, it was difficult to find. Parking was horrendous, and so it was not the theater of choice for the community. Trouble. Then, because of the financial crisis, the bank called in a loan on another of the theaters that we owned. More lawyers, and in the end, we ended up selling that theater at a loss. More trouble. Not bad enough, IMAX sued us for millions. Millions? We don't have millions. You see, both theaters that were in trouble had IMAX screens that we could no longer show IMAX movies. 2 more lawyers and more trouble. It was later in that 8-year period when my mother-in-law died. My father-in-law had died previously, and in 2011, my husband's sisters sued us over executorship of the will and the trust. Another lawyer, another trouble. We had loans on our home that were taken out to build the theater in Anaheim, and we were basically empty nesters, so we thought we would sell this home. 6,000 square foot homes in 2008 did not sell. Trouble. At the time, my husband stopped taking a salary. In fact, he did that until just last year. That's a lot of years. So our savings went to keep our businesses afloat, to pay our many, many lawyers. I lost track of the number. And what was left went for our household expenses. Stretching money like that, trouble. Oh, and did I mention in 2011 we had 2 weddings, 1 daughter on the East Coast, 1 daughter on the West Coast, more money out of our savings, trouble. And after a number of years with our house on the market without a nibble, we were in danger of losing it. And if that happened, the loans to build the theater that were attached to the house would come due. And we had already lost 2 theaters. Our remaining theater was in San Luis Obispo. It still is, and it did not make enough money to even keep it running. So more money from our savings and from ourselves was poured into that theater. More and more trouble. I'm sinking just standing up here saying it. My thoughts at the time, we are soon to be living in our car. I could see it. I could see it. I hoped that maybe we could afford an RV or maybe even a trailer. But with Erin, our special needs daughter, I just didn't see it. And I was anxious. That's an understatement. And I was struggling with this place that God had me, this destination of trouble. And to get a better look at my thoughts and emotions during that time period, I've gone back to some of my journals, and I'd like to share with you from them. My journals are not just prayers. There are prayers. There are quotes. There are things from sermons. There are things, I even do many little Bible studies. I did one on fear during this whole time, a whole little study on fear. And it's all in my journal, my life story. The first years of that 8-year period I call a detour, much like Saul's Arabia. It was just a detour. I kind of assumed that we would be back on our course. We would, things would be taken care of. This had happened, not to this extent, but in the past where we needed money and somehow it worked out. Never to this extent. And these things kind of kept coming and kept coming. They didn't happen all at once. So this was going to be a detour. And we were soon to be back on that journey towards retirement. And from my journal during that detour, I had written a quote from Ablaze with His Glory. The problem with American Christianity is that we want to control God instead of letting God control us. We have replaced absolute surrender with conditional commitment to His will. I've been talking with Tracy about this, and we had kind of a beginning and an ending. And until I went back to my journal, I did not realize I had written this. And I want you to remember what I wrote here about control and about absolute surrender. I'd like also to read from my prayer. It's just a little snippet of it. Lord, forgive my anxiety. Help me to fully hand over my cares to you. Help me to offer my life to you in absolute surrender. The next phase of that 8-year period I call a delay. This was not a detour. It was taking a little bit longer than I had imagined, and my response was fear. It was here in the delay that I really began to struggle against where God had me. This was not the destination I wanted, and I wanted out. But even here in this unwanted destination, I was ministered to by my sisters in Christ. As women's director at my church, there are perks to that, because I chose as our yearly theme, let your heart take courage. Our verse for that year was Psalm 31:24. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for and hope for and expect the Lord. That's the Amplified. As you can see, I was taking the women of my church along with me on my journey. They were coming, whether they wanted to or not. And together we learned about being courageous. And if you are a teacher, you know that you learn a lot more when you prepare to teach. My first teaching, the introduction of our year, included these points: precepts of God, prayer to God, people of God, promises of God, past deliverances of God. You know that I am all for alliteration. And so each one of those we were to take hold of, to give us courage. When I shared about prayer, I shared from my journal these words. This wasn't written by me, and I don't know who wrote it. I just wrote it down because it meant something to me. In prayer, we give God our fears, our weakness, our impatience, our doubts, our entire nothingness, and He gives us His all, His everything, and we draw from Him courage to carry us through another day and its challenges. With regard to the promises of God, I prepared these little flip books. I've shared mine with Lori Moe. In them, I had the women write down promises that would encourage them wherever they were in their journey. And you know where I was. I was in trouble. I was in fear. I was not wanting the place that I was, so I really started. And I took it home to my husband and I said, is there a promise from the Bible that you are holding on to as we're in the midst of trouble? And he shared with me. Now he says he gave me Psalm 37, but I know he gave me Psalm 27:13, which says, I would have despaired had I not believed I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And the next verse, verse 14 says, wait for the Lord, be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. Went right along with where we were. But this first verse about despairing and believing, seeing the goodness of the Lord, I want to share with you how I envisioned that, because I thought, oh, this is encouraging. I envisioned it, here I am in this place of despair with troubles all around me. But out there, a speck was the goodness of the Lord. I couldn't quite see it, but it was there. And I knew that when I traveled through those troubles and got out of them, I would be able to see the goodness of the Lord. So it was hope out there. I'm going to tell you now what my husband, how I see my husband is envisioning that verse. I was going to tell you later, but I'll forget. So you get it now. This is how my husband saw it. Here we are in the troubles, and his goodness of the Lord wasn't way out there. His goodness of the Lord was here and here and here. As he's in the midst of troubles, he's looking through the troubles to the goodness of the Lord. I could hear it in the things that he would say when he came home. Like one day he came home and he said, guess what happened? You know that IMAX lawyer? He asked me why I had such a smile on my face in the midst of all these troubles. And he said, I got to share the Lord with him. And that man who was backslidden in his faith started going to church. Goodness of the Lord. And he was seeing it in the midst of the troubles. We talked about past deliverances as a means to giving us courage in the present. We talked about stones of remembrance because we're going to study Joshua, and those were our journals. And I shared from my journals Jim Cymbala's words. In our confrontation with obstacles or opponents today, we would do well not to focus on the troubles lined up against us. Instead, we need to celebrate the God who has already demonstrated his power and provision in our past. You know, I'm not even using this. Are you all hearing me? I just realized that. Where was I? Instead, we are to celebrate the God who has already demonstrated his power and provision in our past. We don't need to be fretful or anxious. To speak to me much? Yes. We need to anchor our hearts and minds in God's overwhelming track record. The final years of that 8-year period I call the long layover, or the wait. And it was the longest period. It was in the first year of that time period that the word desperate, we saw that in our song that we sang today, appeared frequently in my journal. It was here that I had no idea how to pray, no idea what to pray. I could not even imagine how we were going to get out of these troubles, how they were going to be resolved. It would take a miracle to my way of thinking. Living in our cars was very much a likelihood as far as I could see. And it was during this time that I had a dream that would begin to change my heart. I'm going to share with you that dream. I don't normally remember my dreams, but this dream was so vivid I can see it in my mind right now. In my dream, I was driving in my car, and I get to a stop sign, and it's a T. I can go left or I can go right. And I wanted to go left. I wanted to go left. I really wanted to go left. But the traffic was such that I wasn't even able to pull out. And it was going and going and going in front of me. And I was getting more frustrated and more frustrated until finally I just bullied my way out. I'm going left, and I'm going left. And then all of a sudden, the road became very, very steep, and there were lots of curves, and my car is picking up speed, and more speed, and more speed, and more speed, and just talking about it now, my heart is going, it was worse than any roller coaster ride I was on, and I'm trying so hard to push on the brake, to push on the brake, push on the brake, and then I'm trying to steer, and I'm losing control, and I'm feeling the car is just going to go off the hill. And then I realize I'm in the back seat. There was no way I was going to reach the brake. There was no way I could reach the steering wheel. And I woke up. And this is from my journal with regard to that dream and how it spoke to me. My dream, a picture of me wanting to take control of my lack of trust in God. Remember the word control. Of my fears of what is happening and what might happen because of our financial difficulties.